We're halfway there, heading into Week 9. I'm Dustin, welcome to Fantasy Smack Talk. This is your Week 9 waiver wire. Before we get into it, like I always like to mention, I rank these in order on how I would pick them up based on 0.5 PPR. And I do shoot this before the Monday night game, so just keep that in mind if something crazy happens in that game. But I always start with the pickup of the week that's brought to you by FanDuel. Now this is a guy that I think is going to get a lot of attention in terms of maybe the most added players, so the ownership needs to be fairly low. And if you haven't gotten into our FanDuel game, click on the link in the description. Thanks for everyone that's been playing so far. It's a beat the experts game. If you win the cash like you normally would. And if you beat us and you win, top 2 entries get a free entry into the following week's Sunday Million, which is nice. Little icing on the cake there. And if you haven't signed up for FanDuel, click on the link, sign up, it helps us out. But my pick of the week this week is Mr. David Moore. I really liked this guy. Heading into their bye. They had their bye week 7, so he didn't get added in a ton of leagues. He's still only on in 5% of leagues, but found the end zone again week 8. That gives him 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games. Now, it does worry me a tiny bit that he hasn't been getting a ton of targets, but you can't ignore the touchdown potential, and at this point, it really looks like he has a role on that offense, and I do think he will be consistently involved, and I think he needs to be owned in a lot more than 5% of leagues, so look for that number to shoot up. Running backs, let's talk about Aaron Jones. Still only on in 75% of leagues. By far, continues to be the clear-cut best runner on that team. And I did like that he was involved in more passing downs week 8. So I think moving forward, and especially with what Ty Montgomery did at the end of the game, I don't think they're going to be really trying to get him as many touches as, moving forward. We'll see. But it only helps Aaron Jones. So I think at this point, that last 25% of leagues, someone needs to finally grab him. He's got way too much upside on that offense. Peyton Barber, only on 50% of leagues. He's been looking a lot better as of late. Ronald Jones got hurt. We'll see the extent of that injury, but him being, it's very solidified right now, that situation. Everyone was speculating Jones might start slowly taking over, but that just hasn't happened. And Barber has looked way too good to only be owned in half the leagues. Doug Martin, I will say he looked a lot better than I thought he was going to. He's still only owning 55% of leagues, but he did lose a fumble at the end of the game when they were trying to come back, so that certainly doesn't help his value, but he did look good, and I do think he will get goal lines on that team, so he should be owning more than 55% of leagues. And then the Philly situation, it's a mess, but I do want to talk about Josh Adams because he looked good, and he looked to really fit the part. And, I think he might be the best overall running back out there. If they can continue to get him a few more looks. 9 carries week 8, led the team with 61 rushing yards. And again, he looked good doing it. A few more people to talk about. Bernard Foreman and McGuire on this list. I just want to bring up, don't forget about them. They're all coming back from injury soon. These are nice bench guys to stash. They all have solid upside. Let's talk about receiver. Kiki with Houston, he's still banged up, but long-term, I really like his upside with Fuller out, so he needs to be owned in more than 25% of leagues. DJ Moore, they're really starting to use him more out there in Carolina. It does take a little bit of time for rookie receivers sometimes to get involved, but I love that they're using him in the running game as well, some of those end-arounds and sweeps and whatnot, and I do think they'll continue to do that because it's been working. Tyrell Williams, he was on his bye week 8, so he wasn't picked up in as many leagues as he probably would have been. So he's still only owning 35% of leagues, so keep an eye on him if he's available. Somewhat big play. He's somewhat dependent on big plays, but he's been doing it a lot as of late, so don't mind him as a pickup. I want to talk about Cortland Sutton, and also on the next graphic you'll see Kendrick Bourne. Both these guys could get a nice bump if a guy gets traded off their team. It looks like, as I'm shooting right now, no trades have happened, but Thomas might get traded out of Denver, and Garcon might get traded out of San Francisco. This would open the door for Sutton and Bourne to have a little bit more value. So just keep a real close eye on those trade rumors. You might even want to pick them up, depending on, it might not happen before waivers clear, but just keep in mind that those guys might have some solid value if the other receivers get moved off their teams. Miami situation, we weren't sure if Parker was going to even play week 8, but they announced it midweek that he was going to play, and he looked good. Probably his best game that I've seen him play, so at this point, he needs to be considered in more leagues, only owning 15%. Moving on, I do want to talk about Anthony Miller, only on 10% of leagues. That Chicago offense is really starting to look, pretty solid. I mean, Trubisky, his completion percentage hasn't been all that great, but they're still putting points on the board. They've been a lot better than they were at the beginning of the year. Anthony Miller looks to be healthy. He's being involved in that offense. So I do like Anthony Miller moving forward. Then a few more guys. One guy I do want to talk about on this graphic is Chris Conley with Kansas City. The extent of the Tyreek Hill injury hasn't been announced, but any type of soft tissue injury with guys like Tyreek Hill, they're very scary, especially on a team with a record that the Chiefs have. They know how important he is. I would not be surprised if they really make sure he is 100% healthy before he comes back. So Conley could have a nice little run here over the next few weeks or so, just depending on the injury. So I don't mind him. Let's take a look at a couple quarterbacks. I do want to talk about Dak Prescott. I think them adding Amari Cooper is only going to help the situation, and it was already starting to look a lot better out there in Dallas. They're coming off their bye, and I do think Dak Prescott is in a position for a solid second half, only on 35% of leagues. I think that should be more. And then Fitzmagic is back. We'll see if he ends up starting again, but Winston did not look good. Fitzpatrick came in, almost got the win, so it puts him right back to where he was, when this was going on at the beginning of the year. I mean, you know what could potentially happen. He could get benched at any time, but he's looked good, and that offense in general has looked better with him out there. So I think, just depending on your situation, depending on when they announce the starter, he might be worth adding. Let's talk about some tight ends. Jack Doyle's back. Looked great week 8. He needs to be picked back up if he was dropped. Chris Herndon, they really have a lack of weapons out there with the Jets right now. Lots of injuries. He has a touchdown in 3 straight games. He's not a real big volume guy, but I do think, you can't ignore the touchdowns. And, I do think they'll target him in the red zone moving forward. So I like his touchdown potential. Then Jordan Thomas I want to talk about. Griffin was out with an illness. We'll see if he misses any more time. But, with Kiki banged up, Fuller injured, the Texans really do have a lack of weapons out there. Thomas, big week 8. If you're desperate for a tight end, he could be a decent spot start. But I don't expect huge things overall. But short term, he's interesting. Some pick up and play defenses for you. Carolina only on 45% of leagues. I don't mind them at home against Tampa Bay. If Fitzmagic goes in there, they might put up a lot of points, but he's good for at least 1 or 2 mistakes most games. Kansas City's defense at Cleveland. Casey's been looking a little bit better on D. They're still giving up a decent amount of points, but they're finding ways to score some fantasy points. So I don't mind them. And then Dallas at home against Tennessee, coming off their bye. They should be fresh for that one. I like them as a pick up and play. So there it is. That's week 9. Hopefully y'all are doing well. Make sure to tune in later in the week for our Halloween episode, and good luck on the wire.